So going back to, Mr. Coghlan, your evidence in relation to the original design, and we were talking about, at that stage, a tailwind standard of
up to 10.
Up to 10. The ICAO standard is 5, which is what you're operating to. What impact does that have?
It certainly drops the percentage of time where you can operate sod props down significantly.
Do you have a number on that?
Look, Senator, I'd have to go back and check from the studies in 2005 to 2006, but our consultants certainly did a wind analysis. I remember it very well, and we did it at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 knots. I thought it dropped from 90 in winter. It probably brought it down from memory into that 60, mid-60s. But, you know, at the time, 10 knots had operated very successfully at Brisbane Airport for about 20 years. I'll be honest with you, I was personally surprised when in 2017 we were advised that CASA was unlikely to allow the continuation of the 10 knots.
So how many airports around the country would have a variation to the current 5?
The only airports at present that I'm aware of that operate the sod props was Sydney, the sod prop standard in Australia.
The sod prop standard at Sydney's 5, isn't it?
5. But again,
the sod prop's different from the wind tail issue, though?
Yes.
Why are they? Yeah, they're different, yeah. So the ones, doesn't matter if you're doing sod props or not, there's a certain tailwind standard. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Sydney is 5, but Sydney was always these closely spaced parallels. So the concern at the time when, you know, I was involved with pilots...
But it's an international standard of 5.
The international standard's at 5. There are airports overseas for noise management that at night do allow higher, but it's a individual case for that airport.
And so what was the basis of your submission to increase it to 7, the drivers for it, and who did you consult with?
So, Senator, there have actually been 3 applications over the last decade to restore the 10 knots, or to increase the tailwind limit. Following its removal, Air Services applied to CASA for 10 knots. That was rejected. BAC followed up with an application for 10 knots that was rejected around 2017. And in 2022, post-opening, now that we have more data on the operation of the runways, the decision was made to submit a safety case for 7 knots, as that was seen as being a compromise between the 5 and the 10. We believe we would still get improvement in sod props from 7 knots. The safety case was actually prepared and submitted by Air Services, and they did consult widely. There may have been some confusion this morning, Senator, because AusAlpa were consulted on the safety case twice in February 2022, and they actually made 11 individual submissions, all in opposition to the safety case, but they were certainly
the position hasn't changed.
They were certainly consulted, Senator.
And so I suppose in the safety sense, and it just goes to a particular perspective in relation to a standard being a standard being a standard. That's why I asked the question about how many airports in Australia had a variation to the ICAO standard, but the actual desirability of that.
Senator, to put that into
I understand you're trying to resolve some problems, so I get that side of it.
But in terms of standard, ICAO has around about 11,200 standards across the aviation business. If a country wishes to operate to a different standard, they file a difference with ICAO, because individual CAAs or CASs make their own assessments. Out of that 11,200 at the moment, Australia has filed 4,280 differences with ICAO. So of the 11,000 standards, we are different in 4,000 areas. I think from our perspective, we then don't understand from a risk perspective why you would not actually consider an application for 7 knots on its merits.
Just because there's been a whole range filed doesn't take away from the point about the consistency of the standard and not having to have to, from an operational perspective, be looking at variations all the time in an operational sense. So that's why I asked the specific question about the desirability of it. I mean, just because somebody's done it doesn't necessarily make it more desirable.
I don't disagree with you, Senator, and I think global standards are a good thing, particularly for an organisation like, or an industry like aviation. It is a global market or a global activity, and so having consistency is important. Having a single standard, however, 5 knots, that applies to a very short grass runway, for example, in Papua New Guinea, versus a 3.6 kilometre runway in Brisbane with extensive wind measurement, air traffic control, does sometimes seem to be challenging, and that taking a risk-based approach on an individual basis or airport basis seems reasonable, particularly when the outcomes for the community could be so significant.